Welcome along, fellow time travelers. This time around, we're going to be traveling back in time with Elliot Mintz, who has written a great book entitled We All Shine On, John, Yoko, and Me. We're heading back to talk about his friendships with John and Yoko and quite a bit about the Dakota and some other subjects that I'm confident many people will find interesting. Before I begin, please like and share this program and subscribe to this channel on whatever platform you're listening on. There will be a link below to Elliot Mintz's YouTube channel and social media links. Please check those out. Please also check out his website, I'll put that link below as well, where you can get information about his extraordinary book, and you could hear quite a number of the interviews that he conducted over the course of his stellar career. Now let's begin our journey. Good evening, Elliot. It's good to speak with you again. How have you been, sir?
Healthy and well. Thank you for asking, Scott. Okay.
Great. Every listener has seen countless films, and over time, there's been a noticeable detachment from the characters. This is largely due to the need to market movies globally, leading to the frequent use of wide shots, where lips don't move visibly, and this is to be able to facilitate dubbing in other countries. And consequently, audiences have lost the deep, emotional connection to the story and its characters. And this shift became prominent in the early 1990s. Before then, you had visionary directors like Peter Bogdanovich, who meticulously used establishing shots and medium shots and over-the-shoulder angles and close-ups and extreme close-ups to weave a narrative tapestry. For too long, the public's knowledge of Yoko Ono, and in his later years, John Lennon, was confined to wide, impersonal shots that grew wider with time. Elliot, with your beautifully written book, you have brought us medium shots, close-ups, and extreme close-ups of their lives. You have provided a personal, intimate view that only those closest to them would recognize. You've crafted an emotional investment in John and Yoko. We thought we knew them, fans. We thought we knew them. But in many cases, we're only familiar with their public image. Your book is an invitation into your campground. You have led us to a campfire where you have placed warm mugs of cider in our hands. And there, by the fire, you have introduced us to your friends, John and Yoko, not as distant celebrities, but as real people sharing moments of their lives. And I want to thank you for that intimate portrayal in your wonderful book.
Well, Scott, far more than I deserve, and I will just graciously say thank you.
You're very much welcome. It's a wonderful book. I pre-ordered it, and I was happy to receive it. Amazon sent it off right away. Mostly, I read biographies. I've learned long ago, as you probably have, that truth is stranger than fiction. And when diving into biographical works, I like to see life as a hero's journey through that framework and viewing through the lens of mythic storytelling. And I don't want to make you uncomfortable, Elliot, but your life, like other people's lives, can be seen as a hero's journey. And you think about the ordinary world, which is akin to Dorothy, her life on the black and white farm in Kansas before the whirlwind of change, before the tornado came and lifted her up and brought her to Oz. So to get rolling, let's introduce people to your ordinary life before John and Yoko came in like a whirlwind and carried you off away to another land. Where were you born? What influenced your career choice? And how did your early career unfold prior to John and Yoko entering your life?
I'm going to do my best to be responsive to your question without boring your audience, but I must say this is the very first time that I've been compared to Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, especially in the black and white scenes.
Sure.
But I kind of understand the metaphor. Look, I was born February 16th, 1945, in the Bronx section of New York. The family didn't stay there very long. We moved to Manhattan, to a neighborhood called Washington Heights. It was just kind of an emerging neighborhood for people making their best attempt to get into the middle class, I guess. My dad was in the coat and suit business, the garment industry. And he worked with his hands, and he worked very, very, very hard for 50 years. My mom was what they called in those days a homemaker. And I had a sister who was 2 years younger than I. We grew up in modest surroundings. I don't recall anything distinctive happening in my life before I was 5 or 10 years old. Went to public school, failed in most of my classes. It was not an unhappy childhood, but it was a solitary childhood. I developed a speech impediment, a stutter, almost overnight. We still don't know what caused it. And I used to, and I'm going to give you an example of the way I spoke, but I don't want you to think that I'm making fun of people who stutter, because it's a very debilitating experience. But I used to talk like that. And I took that with me to school, as well as being the smallest kid in class. And you can imagine the reaction of my fellow students. So I withdrew. I didn't feel comfortable talking with anyone. And I withdrew into a world of people I would hear on radio and watch on television in those days. They were my friends. David Susskind, Jack Parr, early Steve Allen, monologists. And while listening in my small bedroom, I developed an affection for those people and thought what it would be like if I were there. So as soon as I turned 17, I took the first flight to LA, showed up at LA City College. I applied to all the colleges, but only one would accept me because of my poor grades. And LA City College, a local community college, just happened to have an excellent broadcasting department. And I showed up at the broadcasting department with the stutter and a New York accent, because I had never been outside of New York. So I just talked the way people talked on the street corners in the neighborhood I was raised in. And I said, I want to be on radio. And I spent a long time studying all the aspects of broadcasting, coming home at night, laying down on the floor, taking a 20-pound typewriter and putting it on my solar plexus, inhaling deeply and slowly learning to speak, exercising breath control, elongating my tongue, and slowly but surely the stutter began to go.
Wow.
The accent was even easier. And I hung around a neighborhood in East LA, living in I think it was $150 a month, one-room place with the hot plate and a mini fridge and a stand-up shower and a Murphy bed that turned into, it was a couch that turned into a bed. I lived very frugally, about $250, $300 a month. I didn't have a car for 2 years, used public transportation or worked or walked. And it led to me somehow landing a radio job and beginning a broadcasting career, which is where most people, I guess, discovered me.
I will let you know, you probably already know this, but when it comes to stuttering, you're actually in great company. The author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, his name, people think, is Lewis Carroll, but his real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson. He had a terrible stutter, and the character that he created in the book, the dodo bird, was actually based on him, because when he would say his last name, this is a true story, he would say Dodgson.
Huh.
Once again, I'm not making fun, just like you, of anybody who stutters. I have people in my family that have had a stutter, but it was interesting how he was able to take that and turn it into something positive and creative. And
Never knew that. What a fascinating story.
yeah,
Fascinating.
and so congratulations on your accomplishment, being able to do that. It reminds me a little bit of the story of Tony Curtis. You know, he grew up not much money in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he would go to the movies with Joe Franklin, you know, who was a WOR talk show host.
Talk show, yes.
And they were great friends when they were children. And he was trying to think, what can I do to get out of my situation? And he watched Cary Grant movies. And he said, well, let me learn how to talk, and let me, see how I can stand, and how I can, incorporate the Cary Grant persona in order to improve my life.
You are just a wealth of information. I know from your writings how much you value detail, and never ceases to amaze me where you take your detailed discovery work. Great stories.
Let me ask you, Elliot, we're talking about the ordinary world before you met John and Yoko. Let's very briefly talk about your ordinary world before writing this book. We'll talk about the inspiration for that in a minute. I believe it was Sean Lennon. But prior to the discussion with Sean and with Yoko, what is it that keeps Elliot Mintz busy?
Oh, it was anything but ordinary. Anything but ordinary. After I landed my first one or two celebrity interviews when I was in school, namely Jane Mansfield and Jack Lemmon, who just decided to give a 17-year-old kid a break by letting me interview them for the school radio show, I began to shop around town with a very anemic resume, and was accepted by a listener-supported station to try and do a talk show aimed at teenagers that had never been done before. And at that time, I was 21. They hired me to do just that, to talk about basically rock and roll and to interview the cultural icons of the time. And that's where I first started talking to the Frank Zappas of the world and all the others. It was a talk show as well where people would call in. That led, after a year or two to a bigger radio station calling me, an AM station, I think was KLAC, saying that they would like to have me do what I do there. And the pay was better than the $50 a week that I was getting at KPFK. So I hopped ship, and then I started on the media route of going from station to station, from KLAC to KMET to KLOS to KABC to Earth News Radio to Westwood One. Landed a little television show called Head Shop. Did 100 of those, same format, interviewing people of the cultural landscape, showing little video clips we'd shoot around high schools. And the last one led me to position at Eyewitness News on ABC television in Los Angeles, which was my first excursions into TV. I spent my life during that period trying to get guests to appear on the shows, research the guests, being up most of the night because a lot of these were late night radio shows, Still living a fairly frugal and simple life. I guess the turning point was in 1971 when I did an interview with Yoko Ono. But prior to that time, Scott, it was the kind of life somebody lived who had great aspirations, worked hard to achieve them, and set virtually everything else aside.
The second stage of the hero's journey is called the call to adventure. In this case, it was an actual phone call. What was it that led you to call the Dakota in hopes of interviewing Yoko Ono?
I listened to a DJ, or as a personality on the radio. Record companies, especially in those days, would send you a stack of records each week to listen to see if they could convince you to give them the music airplay. And there were hundreds of records that were sent to me every month. And I diligently put the tone arm down on the first track and listened for a minute or so. Most of them were not particularly memorable albums, and I put aside. There was one that just caught my interest, a record called Fly by Yoko Ono. I had heard of her, of course, through the John and Yoko experience, but I never paid much attention to her solo work. And I listened to track 1, which led me to track 2. I listened to the entire album, and there was something that came through. It was what I call an original work. It didn't seem to be predicated upon anything that I had heard before. I was fascinated not only by the music, but the artist. So I called the record company and said, hi, to the PR lady, what's the chances of doing an interview with Yoko? And at the time, the chances were very good. Most DJs were not all that interested in that subject. She put me in touch with an assistant at the Dakota. I introduced myself, said I'd love to do the interview. I love the record. He said, I'll get back to you. He got back to me the next day and said, when do you want to do the interview? I said, as soon as Yoko is available. And he said, how about Sunday? A couple of days later. And boom, I was on the air live. Yoko was in New York. And we conducted that first interview. It ran probably a little under an hour. And again, she was a wholly original thinker, at least to me, that in all the interviews I had done up to that time, I had never heard anybody quite like her, with her perceptions and her perspectives. And I liked her instantly and went home that night thinking that that one worked. You've interviewed people, Scott, and you know when something is clicking and when you're just kind of walking through the field awry. I knew that this one had meaning. I went to sleep. The day passed. I'm an insomniac, so it's hard to keep up with when the night becomes the day. And the phone rings at my house on my private line. My personal phone, not the business phone in the house. And it was Yoko. I was surprised. She called and she said, I just wanted to call you to tell you how much I enjoyed talking with you last night. You asked questions that hadn't been asked of me before. And you didn't want me to talk about the Beatles or John. You seemed genuinely interested in my work. And it was very nice of you to do that. I wanted to tell you. Well, I was blown away. And I thanked her for calling me, hung up the phone, and I reflected upon it. In all the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews I had done up to that time, nobody ever called to thank me. In fact, when people go on these media tours to talk with endless numbers of people, they do a drop-by, they do the interview, they don't even remember the name of the person who interviewed them. They're just on to the next one. This was a thank you from her. And I was just so moved by it that I picked up the phone and called her and said, look, I don't mean to intrude upon your privacy or anything, but I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to thank me. That led to probably a 2.5-hour phone conversation where we were exploring each other's worlds and thought processes. And so it began. Yoko might have called me the very next day. I would call her back. And we spoke every day for weeks. And one day I was talking to her about books that she was reading. She said that she liked reading mysteries, which I thought was unusual. And she asked what I was reading. And I had mentioned a book that I was reading at the time by a philosopher named J. Krishnamurti. Yoko mentioned the name of the book. And I said, yes, that's it. Do you read it? Did you read it? And she said, no, I don't read those kind of books. But John's reading that right now. You should talk to him about it.
Wow.
And I said, well, I'd welcome that. And she said, it's his birthday in 2 days. Maybe you should talk to him on the radio about, his birthday and Krishnamurti. And I said, how do I do that? And the assistant called, and he set it up, and boom, it was John on the telephone. And we did, an hour interview. And I tried to, ask the obvious questions and the not so obvious questions. He seemed to like it as well. We definitely had a rapport. For those people who listen to the interview, and it's online, I think you could tell that there was a closeness beyond radio host and guest, which led to an ongoing series of conversations with John. And then it became much of my world, where I would talk with John and Yoko every night for weeks and weeks and weeks. Sometimes Yoko, who got up before John, he liked sleeping, would talk with me for an hour or two, and then she put the phone on hold. She said she had to go off to do business stuff, but John was just waking up and he wanted to talk to me. So I'd get off the phone with Yoko, try to get a cup of tea in me, and be talking to John. The longest conversation I ever had with both of them at one time ran 6 hours, most of my day. And when I finished, I put together a set list for the program for the evening. I tried to figure out who would be in town and how to reach them to do an interview, drive to the station, catch a bite to eat when I got home at 1 or 2 in the morning, maybe smoke a doobie, close my eyes, and it wouldn't be long, a few hours, before the phone rang again. And it was them. It went on that way until I physically met them in a little place called Ojai, a town not far from Los Angeles.
Well, thank God you mentioned the name of that town, because I was thinking, how am I going to pronounce that? I listened to the interview with Yoko recently, and it brought me back to the time that I purchased Ono Box, which was an extraordinary amount of money, that I can tell you, but it was the number of songs that were there. It was a great value. And I committed myself to listening to all of it from start to finish. I won't say I loved every song. I also don't love every Eagles song. I don't love every Beatles song. I don't love every, I mean, we can go down the line, which is fine. But the interview that you conducted with Yoko Ono, as well as a good number of the songs in Ono Box, were so delicate, were so beautiful, that showed an inner beauty, like a flower, right? I mean, it's hard to describe where some of this inner beauty even came from when you consider the life that she led with, World War II and her family going through what they had to go through and the things that she had to go through, and then to be able to put together these songs that really were just extraordinary to listen to. And if more people listened to that, I think that there would be a great balancing of the scales because we could all nitpick at this and we can focus on that. And then you hear these songs, and it reminds me, and we could talk about this a little bit later if you like, but I was listening to a demo tape by Phil Spector of To Know Him Is to Love Him. And, he didn't sing the song, obviously, but he put together the demo tape because he was one of the writers on it. And you heard this, he was singing, I guess he was 19 or 20 years old. And you think to yourself, no matter what you have to say about how his life may have ended up, there was a time, this man was made of music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
He was filled with music. He was filled to the gills with it in a way that's difficult to explain. And you have Yoko Ono as well, who I thought what was extraordinary about it was that here is a woman who knows, this is going to sound strange, John Lennon's secrets in a way. Like she has the inner information. She sees the magic tricks. She knows how John Lennon might come up with ideas for songs. He watches commercials. I get it. Oh, he's looking out the window. Okay, I get it. Oh, he's thinking about a childhood poem. I get it. And it's like she never met John Lennon. Right?
Yes.
It's like she's writing songs that are incredible in their own right. And you feel like, wow, she is her own person. She has her own distinct way of expressing herself. And a lot of people, you associate John and Yoko, John and Yoko, John and Yoko. And I think John Lennon said in an interview, and I'm not quoting him exactly, but it was something like her relationship with him in a way was one of the worst things that ever happened to her career. Because who knows what kind of reputation, what kind of career she would have had she not been considered, she's in the shadow of John Lennon, John and Yoko. And so anyway, I really was impressed with the music, and I listened to it quite a bit. In fact, I met Yoko very briefly. I went to see New York Rock. And I won't say that I didn't appreciate listening to other people sing the songs, right? Just like Bob Dylan. A lot of people love Bob Dylan's voice, but a lot of people sang the songs, maybe you like their versions better, right?
Yes.
And so, but either way, they were Yoko songs. And there was still that inner beauty and this great way of expression. And it was just fantastic. And what a great experience. And so I enjoyed listening to your interview with her. And I hope a lot of people listened to it at the time. I'm assuming they did if you were on the radio. It was local, Elliot, when you were in Los Angeles?
Yes, but with a very large reach from San Diego to Santa Barbara.
Sure.
And, it's been picked up via YouTube, or people can just Google it.
Yeah.
So, I always say, I used to say it about my interviews, and I used to give media advice to clients where I would always tell them it's not how many, it's who. That if you reach a small core group constituency, that you really move. It's infinitely more important than reaching 10 million people who don't really care.
Without a doubt. Let's talk about Sean Lennon and his role, because this is the call to adventure as well, in a different way. He inspired you, or encouraged you, to write We All Shine On. What was the circumstance that brought that to be?
A couple of years ago, I was visiting Yoko for her birthday. Sean hosted a little gathering, and it was just made up of very, very close family members and a sprinkling of friends. I don't know if there were more than 20 people there. And Yoko's born on February 18th. I'm born on February 16th. So we made it like a little dual birthday party. And Sean, who was the host, he tended to every detail you can imagine. My favorite cake in the world that I can't resist, my one sugar fix, is carrot cake. And he had 2 homemade carrot cakes made. I do have a taste for a particular type of Chardonnay. He saw to it that there would be a case of the Chardonnay and that my little room would be ready and made comfortable. He just went out of his way to make me feel welcome. Although I was really there to celebrate Yoko, I don't make a big to-do about my own birthday. But that occasion, that was the best birthday present I could have had. And, during just a passing conversation, he said, and he had mentioned it once or twice before the birthday celebration. He said, you really should get on with writing that book because you knew the family better than anybody else during that particular period of time. You certainly spoke to them more. You were their closest friend. So don't let too much time go by. I thought about it. It would have been easy to just brush it off, as another reminder. But it was also the time that I was about to celebrate my 79th birthday. And I realized that prognostication was not part of my future, that if not now, then when? So within a very short period of time, I wrote up a little resume, and it was submitted to William Morris Endeavor, to a woman who heads the literary division there, brilliant woman named Erin Malone, and she thought it had legs. She thought it was, more than acceptable. And she introduced me to a variety of publishers. We had a meeting, and there was one publisher from Dutton Random House, a woman named Jill Schwartzman, who really got what I wanted to do and said that the company, wanted to publish the book. And I had spoken to others, and they had similar enthusiasm, but I felt that Jill really got the book and the subtext of the book. So I signed a deal, and then spent the better half, almost, of a year writing it. It's the first book I've ever written. It's an arduous process. You've written books, so you know. I had not written a book. I did not know. And talk about the amount of time I spent in the broadcast years, the time that my writing skills kicked in was from midnight to 6 a.m. That's when I wrote best, or more completely. And I did that for months on end, finishing at 6 o'clock in the morning, exhaustedly trying to fall asleep, getting on with whatever else I was doing during the day, trying to maintain some kind of a social life or personal life. But it was all consuming until one day the publisher said, we love it. It's accepted. We go to print.
Wow. It's interesting. When you tell the story, I once again apply the hero's journey template, because in stories like the Odyssey with Telemachus and Odysseus, you have the stages, which is the refusal of the call. The hero, like in Rocky, Apollo issues the challenge. Rocky doesn't know if he can take on the challenge. This is the greatest athlete in the world, in his opinion. How do you go up against Apollo Creed? But he thinks about it. And so you had the refusal of the call, which was brief. You had the meeting of the mentor, which in many ways was the process of the agent, the publisher. You're crossing the threshold, and then you're crossing into the, you have tests. You're challenging yourself to see if you could even take on this challenge. You're going through the process of, in many ways, you were your own mentor because you had to take your own counsel. You had to spend a lot of time, I would assume, in your house, staring at the ceiling, thinking back in time, wondering what to choose and what not to choose. I bet you smiled a lot to yourself, remembering things that John said to you, and Yoko said to you, and laughing. And it was quite a journey for you, wasn't it, to be able to reach the point where you finally turned it in?
I'm first in recovery from being mentioned in the same sentence as the Odyssey and Rocky. I'll have to recover from that for a bit.
We can do Greek references all day long, Elliot, if you like.
You can. I can't.
I'm dying to say Agamemnon.
I probably could do more Stallone references.
Okay, we'll go with that too.
I know him.
Oh, Sylvester Stallone seems like a nice fellow.
The writing certainly evoked some very happy memories. I even took a little bit of time off while writing to just look through scrapbooks that I maintained of letters and postcards that John had sent me over the years. I think I have close to 100 of them. They almost all made me laugh. That was the lead, that John's sense of humor was always overwhelming. But in the memory process, keep in mind I was writing a book where everybody knew how it would end. And there were moments, of course, in our odyssey together. Gosh, the Iliad, the Odyssey. I don't want to slip into that. But there were moments in our odyssey that were also very depressing, very sad, things that occurred that didn't make me feel good at all. And those were evoked. And of course, when I got into areas about the end, it was devastating for me to write about taking, let's say, an inventory of his personal effects after his passing. I was very, very glad when I turned the last page on my laptop.
It's very interesting, though, that the story of John Lennon didn't end in the way that a normal person's life would end, because he left behind, obviously, a wife, family, friends, countless memories, great music. I was listening to one of your interviews the other day, and it ended with you saying that he brought so much joy to people's lives through his music. And that music lives on. And if you think about it, that is life after death, isn't it? It's like in so many ways, he's still a part of people's lives long after physically he's gone.
I rejoice in that, of course. And I presume that his music will last forever. It was there. But we were not drawn to each other over the music, and we spent precious little time in discussion about his music. I'm not a musician, and he found relief in being able to talk with somebody who didn't constantly want to talk about either the Beatles or music or session players or guitars or any of that. He knew that I didn't have a handle on that stuff and took relief in it. So when he left us, my first thought was not, well, the music will always go on. My first thoughts were more selfish. And they went to the place of, I'm never going to be able to pick up the phone and spontaneously call John to talk about the 6 o'clock news.
Yeah. Well, that also is part of the journey, isn't it? Let's go back a little bit to the ordeal, if you like. I know your time is valuable, so we'll talk about that. I will say one thing. You know that I've always been interested in John Lennon's home that he owned called Tittenhurst Park.
Yes.
And it was a beautiful estate. And it had these incredible gardens, 72 acres. They didn't call it an arboretum, they called it a museum of trees. Because the gentleman who owned it in the 1800s, he brought in trees from all over the world. You had trees from Greece and San Francisco and Colorado. They're in England. And maybe some of these trees might be a dime a dozen today, but they sure weren't in the 1800s.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me think, I'm always interested in design psychology. I'm interested in how creative people live and work, because I'm always interested to know how they've been inspired by their surroundings. George Harrison, as you may know, owned a beautiful estate called Friar Park. And you've got this deep, beautiful, dark wood. And you have these phrases and sayings and jokes carved into the wood and around the garden. And so I was always interested in how John and Yoko chose to decorate Tittenhurst Park. It made me wonder, John Lennon and Yoko Ono were so incredibly sharp and smart and creative that they didn't seem to need external stimuli. That the things that they could speak off, from memory and things that they're interested in. Whereas a lot of writers, when they're stuck on what to do, they're looking around, they're trying to find things. And it's interesting that when I saw photos of John and Yoko's apartment in the Dakota, they decorated in a similar way. There's very simple, basic, white. And I'm wondering how many people that you have interacted in your life have chosen that sort of decor, and have you ever thought about why they chose that?
First, I've met no one else who elected to decorate homes in what is referred to in Japanese as shibui, which is a form of very sparse, simple architectural creations, placements of just a few objects. Never met anybody. I think, and of course I never had the pleasure of visiting Tittenhurst. I didn't meet John until just a few weeks after he released Imagine. The Dakota emulated Tittenhurst Park in terms of its whiteness. What we call a living room, the main room in the house, had a little bronze plaque on the door that said white room. And that's how we referred to it. It was an all white room, white ceilings and walls, a white couch, the white piano, just very sparse. It, of course, allowed for the focus in the room to be on the people who occupied the room, as opposed to be distracted by a wall of 56 gold records, let's say, or 400 paintings. That was not what it was about. I sometimes interpreted the whiteness that they used on their billboards, that they used, let's say, in albums, like the White Album, as being virginal in the sense that it was new, it was an awakening, and it expressed the innocence that they brought to their relationship. The Dakota, I'm not talking about the entire building, I'm talking about their apartment, had that feel throughout it. There was very little busyness going on, which is a reason that they created Studio One, their office space, in a completely different apartment on the first floor, which was stacked with floor-to-ceiling file cabinets and a small staff and Yoko's private office and tons of things going on all the time. It was like entering a completely different space. But being in any room of the primary residence, 72, was unlike anything I had ever seen before.
Let's talk about the number 9. How important was it for John and Yoko that they chose apartment number 72, that when you add the 7 and the 2 together, it's the number 9? Was that part of their decisioning to choose that apartment?
Yes. It was an incredibly inviting invitation. You can read in other sources and other ways how the number 9 figured so largely in John Lennon's life. And you could probably list 10 examples of that. Yoko, of course, was a big follower of numerology, where these numbers have meanings that go far beyond coincidence. It's almost as if certain numbers pick you.
It's interesting, Elliot, because it was not popular at the time. It's something that I believe started gaining popularity probably within the last 10 or 15 years. But there's a lot of people, especially in Silicon Valley, who believe that we live in a computer simulation. That doesn't mean there's no religion. It doesn't mean there is no God. A lot of the belief is that we, perhaps, are in the future right now and programming our life. And you see things like that, and you can kind of make it fit into that template as well, that the number 9 did seem to follow John Lennon over the course of his life. And it really is fascinating. And we could all look for things like that, right? We all want to try to, like seeing faces, right? You see faces in a mop. You see faces in the clouds. But the number 9 consistently followed John Lennon. And it is fascinating that they happened to come across apartment number 72 and that it fits so well into the direction that they wanted their life to go.
I don't know much about the trappings of Silicon Valley and how the numbers play among the people who, live in that experience. Sean Ono Lennon knows a lot about that stuff. And I am a believer in matters of a spiritual nature, and I consider numerology to be under that umbrella. So I come at it more from a mystical point of view than assignment by the numbers.
Sure.
I think it all comes from God.
Elliot, you spent a lot of time in John and Yoko's bedroom. I know that sounds strange to people who aren't as familiar with your story, but it was friendship and it was talking, and you and John would speak, and when Yoko would fall asleep, you would lower your voices and speak a little softer, and then she would wake up. And tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, but their bedroom faced West 72nd Street. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know why they would choose that bedroom versus a big, beautiful bedroom overlooking Central Park?
No, no, I never thought of that.
I can't imagine the view was particularly well. I don't know. I guess you could see a part of Central Park from the windows, right? Because
Yes, one window looked down toward Midtown Manhattan. Another window looked directly at Central Park West, at Central Park.
I love reading and seeing photographs of the Egyptian artifacts that Yoko collected. And I saw an interview where she explained why. And she was talking about if you're going to make an investment in something, why not acquire something beautiful that's going to add value, not only to your portfolio, but add value to your life as well. What are your thoughts about some of the Egyptian artifacts that you've seen? I assume they're mainly in 72. Don't know if they're anywhere else.
Yes, they are mainly in 72. Of course, I am not an expert in Egyptology. And the first time that I observed the sarcophagus, or what I refer to simply as a mummy, in the apartment, I was fascinated just by the look of it, the size of it, the designs that were on the cover of the mummy. I was naturally curious to see what was inside, but it was kept on a stand with a plexiglass covering over it. I was just fascinated looking at that. I looked at a lot of the other Egyptian pieces that Yoko had acquired over the years, and they all had this sense of mystery about them. I probably should have spent a little bit more time studying them and maybe asking her a few more questions. She was expert in the area. I think that John liked the objects aesthetically, but I can't remember a single conversation that John and I ever had about those objects. She bought things primarily because they were beautiful and appealed to her aesthetics. There was another side to her that would make purchases for the sole purpose of its investment value, like Holstein cattle, for instance. I don't think cattle are particularly beautiful, unless you might be a different gender Holstein. But she just felt that that would be a good investment. It turned out to be superb.
Did they own a farm where those were kept, or they were just an investment that were kept elsewhere? Do you know?
I'm not absolutely certain. I think that the cattle were kept on somebody else's farm, and that they owned the physical cattle.
Yeah.
I don't believe that John and Yoko ever had the place where the cattle were kept.
Their real estate portfolio is fascinating to me. In addition to, the building in the village, the house in Palm Beach was extraordinary. I know John had only been there one time, I believe, and the two homes in Virginia. I don't know if had you ever been to them? They were two historic
No.
plantations, beautiful historic plantations, and obviously the Long Island mansion as well. And it was they all just seemed very warm and extraordinary and beautiful and something to look forward to when getting out of New York City, to be able to, look up at the stars and and get some fresh air and to get into another state of mind outside of being in the city itself. Where, outside of spending time in the bedroom, where would you say that John and Yoko felt most at home? Was it a lot of time spent in the kitchen?
Yes. First was the bedroom, only because, at the end of the day, they just wanted to be comfortable. And for them to be comfortable would be similar to you and I putting on a pair of pajamas or something like that, and getting under the covers in their bed where they had their books, where John had his stereo system. There was a giant television at the foot of the bed that was always on in silence. And it was a fairly busy or somewhat cluttered room. There was a white wicker chair that I sat in. And it was convenient in the sense that when Yoko just got tired of the conversations that were going on, she could just nap and let John and I speak over her. And there was also a time that I could remember where it was obvious that John was getting sleepy, and I would say, look, it's getting late. The sun's going to come up soon, so I'm going to just slip out the door and take a walk back to the hotel. And he almost insisted upon walking me to the front door and locking it afterwards. So we didn't have to go far from that. So it was a dreamy kind of space, and it was very conducive to our very late night conversations. The kitchen chatter would be second favorite, but frequently would be interrupted by other staff people who had things to do in the kitchen, and the kitchen was more busy. More stuff was going on it, and it was gigantic. It didn't have the intimacy that the old bedroom did.
I saw an interview with Sir George Martin, and he said that he visited John Lennon, I believe, one time only. And he said it was so noisy. There were so many people around the apartment doing work, construction, taking walls down, doing things. Is that your recollection of, at least at some point?
No.
No?
I'm wondering if he may have had his visit to the Dakota in Studio One, in the office, where there was all that kind of stuff going on, with the staff, and where it was noisy, where the phones were always on, and you heard the sound of fax machines coming and, things being faxed or things being faxed out, and deliveries of fan mail and objects that they had ordered, to try and keep all of that away from 72. I don't recall it being noisy at all upstairs.
The only thing that I could, when I first saw that interview, the only thing I could think of is that the kitchen in the Dakota back in the 1800s and, for years after, decades after, were a series of actually, I won't say smaller rooms. You've been in the space, so there's really nothing small in the Dakota. But, there was a butler's pantry, and there was a small room for, the butler to maybe be able to go in. And there was a series of small rooms. And I believe, just based on a few photos that I've seen of the kitchen, there's not that many out there, is that they enlarged the space quite a bit. And so you've got the kitchen, which is a big open space, and you've got, I guess, like a living room. Is that right? With a television in there?
I wouldn't say a living room, but you're correct that there were a series of smaller rooms. The two of them must have taken out a significant wall to create a kitchen that was twice as long as the original one. And the butler's pantry really just became a closet, which was right behind the wall that the big TV and the stereo system was hooked up to. Sure. In other words, what they did is they took a kitchen and turned it into an entertainment center. So yes, you could dine at the small wooden table. It was very informal. And you could look across the entire room and watch the big screen TV. It was the kitchen where we set up the big Christmas tree, right around this time of the year, as opposed to the living room. And the kitchen was also adjacent to a large and very formal dining room, probably the one room that was used the least during the years that I would visit.
I saw a film of it. It was Yoko and Sean, he was very young, and it was a very brief clip, I think for some television show or something. And I think that the walls were lined with mirrors. Is that right?
No, in the dining room, the walls did in fact have paintings and one very, very, very long table. It could have been 15 or 20 feet long, made of a very, very polished, from my perspective, cherry wood type substance. The mirrored room was Yoko's private office downstairs, which was all done in smoked mirrors, dark mirrors. And on the ceiling of the office was a beautifully painted sky. There were a few very tall palm trees that were lit from the bottom, uplights. They were always on, with deco pieces, a piano, a chaise, a fireplace, a couch, Yoko's magnificent Egyptian desk.
That desk is incredible.
Just an absolute work of art unto itself. The Tiffany lamp was the real deal. They didn't get knockoffs. They got the real stuff. So yes, they loved things of beauty, but they weren't necessarily purchased for resale value.
Sure. Was that ceiling the only one that was painted like a sky? Were there any other rooms that were painted like that?
I'm trying to remember, Scott, and I just have a faint memory that Sean's bedroom may have been painted with sky. If there was any other room, that would be the one that I recall.
Were you at Sean's birthday party when Steve Jobs showed up with an Apple Macintosh computer?
Yes.
Keith Haring, I believe, was there.
Yeah, Steve Jobs appears at this birthday party for Sean. Yoko had set up, a variety of what I call pinball machines. There weren't pinball machines, but they were the kind of game-operated machines and other things for kids to play with, 8-year-olds. In the living rooms, some of the adult people who were visiting hung out. I was sitting on the couch, and I remember Steve Jobs coming in with a cardboard box, and he opened the cardboard box and took out, the first Apple PC, and just plugged it into an AC outlet and began to demonstrate what it could do. What it could do at that time was basically what I would refer to as an Etch-a-Sketch, where you could move the mouse around and do line drawings. It didn't blink on and off. It didn't have color images. There was no internet yet involved. And I remember Keith Haring was there and Andy Warhol was there. And they, of course, gravitated to the Etch-a-Sketch thing. They really liked it a lot. Sean wandered in with a couple of friends. He looked at it. He may have played with it. But it didn't leave much of an impression. Later in the evening, Steve explained to a group of us that someday there would be something like that in every home in the world, and people would be able to talk with each other and see each other. And he explained a concept about the internet that most of us kind of scratched our head. And when the party ended, the machine was just there next to the cardboard box. I spent about 45 minutes with him, just talking about the vision. I really admired his enthusiasm. We had a good talk, and he said, look, if you want to talk more, I'm going to be in New York for a few days because I just got a place not far up from here. And if you'd like, you could come visit me. And in the next day or two, I went to the place, new apartment that he bought, and we spent, a few hours talking about the vision. As life would go on, he would call me on a few occasions because there were some clients that I represented that he wanted to reach about doing his first big billboard campaign called Think Differently. I remember he called one day and said, "Do you think Bob Dylan would be interested in doing a billboard?" And I said, I never speak for Bob. I'll certainly get the message to him. He said he wants to use Charlie Chaplin, Pablo Picasso, that John and Yoko have already committed. And it would be about people who thought differently and changed the world.
Wow.
I liked the campaign immediately. I think we spoke a few months before his passing, when he was, obviously ill. I wanted to reach him because I had heard about a cancer treatment overseas that seemed workable. But it was a brief talk, and he was at peace with his prognosis.
Yeah, he was a brilliant man. Was it the San Remo where he bought the penthouse? A few blocks up from the Dakota.
It was the Towers, and that's where he invited me to join him, within a day or two after I first met him.
I love the stories about John Lennon's juke boxes, right? Because he had the one that he brought over from Tittenhurst, which I believe was near the kitchen. And then you mentioned in an interview that when you went for New Year's Eve, to spend New Year's Eve with John and Yoko, there was a very large jukebox in there that was given to him by Elton John.
Yes.
So the story is beautiful. If you want to talk about that New Year's Eve.
Well, New Year's Eve was spent with John having set up it turned into apartment 71, which they acquired. And it was a beautiful space where he wanted to create what looked like a little private club. He had heard about a private club that I believe Jim Belushi had set up, and one that Jimi Hendrix had set up in an old townhouse in the village. And he thought, wouldn't it be great to have a place to just hang out that was like a nightclub? Because he obviously couldn't go and hang out at nightclubs with Yoko. So we spent the afternoon going to secondhand stores to find 78 RPM records for this beautiful jukebox that Elton had got for him. And there was a Mellotron that I believe was in apartment 71. We were going to have a little New Year's Eve gathering, so we found some old used tuxedo jackets, a couple of deco items, and we perused some of the old 78 RPM record stores in downtown New York and found some records that really appealed to him, including some that went back to the 1940s of artists that he listened to as a child. And we brought those home, and we put the whole thing together in, an hour. And then he arranged for a private invitation to go to Yoko, inviting her to the opening of what he called Club Dakota. And I think he indicated that it was a dressy affair, or that the attire was dressy. And Yoko did, in fact, show up in a gorgeous dress. And we wore our little cheap tuxedo jackets. John also wore his Liverpool school tie. We sat and gazed at some cardboard pink flamingos that we had purchased as well, that we thought would be nice for the club. And, after a while of talk and laughter and music listening, the two of them just decided to dance. And they asked if I would just take some Polaroid pictures of them dancing. And I remember that the snow was falling, and I could see them I mean, 71 had these windows that were facing out that, again, floor to ceiling. You saw the snowfall. Listen to this gorgeous music. And watching John and Yoko dancing together, it was one of the most romantic moments of my time with them, and one of the more romantic moments of my life. One photo survived that I had, which I put in the book.
There's so many great, beautiful stories in your book. You did mention, though, that you think that your close association with John and Yoko, the amount of time you spent with them, may have contributed to the fact that you may have never gotten married. And I was giving some thought to that, Elliot. And I was wondering if, and it could be conscious, it could be subconscious. And if it's subconscious, then you wouldn't know. It made me wonder if you saw such extraordinary love, you saw such extraordinary dedication, and that you had it in your mind, well, that's what a relationship is to be like. And it must be very difficult to try to, I don't know if recreate's the right word, but, that's what you look for. And it's, like a child, right? And you see, let's say, a father being abusive to the mother, you think that's normal. Or you see the father being loving and affectionate to the wife, you see the other way around. And so you're influenced by, what you see. And you talk about your friendship with Mickey Dolenz. Did I say his name right? Dolenz?
Yes.
And his wonderful wife and the Thanksgiving dinners that she made. And Frank Zappa, obviously you were probably friends with his wife as well, and so many others. And so you just saw so many wonderful examples. And I'm just wondering if that may have contributed to it. Like, wow, I need to find that. That's what I'm looking for. And it might be a high standard to try to achieve. Am I right about that?
That is a high bar, yes. Yeah. I also looked at a handful of my friends who were not famous, who had those kinds of relationships that went on for 30, 40, 50 years, where they were totally immersed in each other's lives and grew old together. It is the subtext of my book. And let me just give you that subtext, Scott, and then sadly, I have to run on to my next interview here. The subtext of the book is, how much are we willing to surrender of our personal selves to earn the love of another? And I ask people, not specifically, to reflect upon whoever it is that they're with and what it took or takes to maintain that love, even if it seems to erode some of your own dreams and visions. Yes, of course, I do speculate of what my life would have turned out to be. It's not over yet, thank God. If I had never met the two of them, might I have fallen in love, got married, had children, right now be retired someplace comfortably around horses, maybe on a ranch? I think that it could have fallen that way. But it could have fallen another way. It could have been that I would have stayed on the radio until I was in my 50s or 60s, wound up at some small local regional station playing oldies from midnight to 6 in the morning, going back to a one-bedroom apartment, maybe drinking a little too much, being alone, waking up and doing it again, worried how I'd pay my bills in the future. It could have gone either way. My conclusion was that whatever the sacrifice may have been, what I experienced with these two remarkable people is something that I never would have traded back for a different life.
Beautifully said. Yoko Ono is in her 90s. We all wish her the greatest of health, of course. You've done a wonderful job, Elliot, showing her in a warm and loving light, not only with John, but with Sean, and of course, with yourself. Friendship is everything. And we live in a time where people do not have the types of neighbors that you had in Laurel Canyon, where people were friendly. People don't have the friendships that they used to have. And if they have any friendships at all, they're not as close as they were. And so you were given a great gift. And let's just talk about the hero's journey. It's like a gift from the gods. You were handed the gift of friendship, to share your friendship with them and to receive their friendship. And so it's quite priceless indeed. I really enjoyed this time travel journey with you, Elliot, and I'm sure others will as well.
I thank you, Scott. I thank you for this interview, one of the more profound ones that I've done, of the more than 100 now in talking about the book. And I love what you bring to the table, and I love your sense of detail. And
I appreciate that.
Joy.
I appreciate that. Good thing you didn't hear the other 73 questions I had for you. So
save them for another time.
I will indeed. Best of luck with your book. I'm going to encourage other people to purchase it and to leave a review on Amazon, which is one of the best places to leave it. And of course, to check out your social media. You're very active on Facebook. I want people to be able to go to your website, which I believe has been revamped quite a bit.
Yes.
And so they could enjoy the wonderful interviews as well, not only with John and Yoko, but my goodness, Groucho Marx. Wow. And so many others. So, all right, well, Elliot, nice once again to speak with you. And I wish you the best of luck with all of you do. Please pass on the greatest love and respect to Yoko. And we wish her the best of health, as I had mentioned.
I shall.
Okay.
And I thank you so much, Scott.
All right, have a good evening.
Good night.
So, what do you think of this interview with Elliot Mintz? Are you familiar with his book? If you have not yet read it, I highly recommend that you do so and leave a kind review on Amazon or wherever else you order it from. You could also return here and share your thoughts in the comments below, which I will personally respond to. Kindly remember to like, share, and subscribe and hit the notification bell because there will be more interviews and I hope you check those out too. Please check out the links below to learn how to support my research and productions. This channel is sponsored by CampfireShop.com, where you can order the highest quality and exclusive candles, herbal supplements, teas, and more. I would also appreciate it if you could become a member of my channel and or join me on Patreon, where you could watch exclusive walking tours of cool places that I've been to. You could also leave a super thanks in the comments below. Kindly be kind to all of our fellow Earthlings and please do not harm them. They don't like that. And please do yourself a favor and go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog or both. You and they will be very glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.